Good evening, brethren. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. We're going to wait about another minute or two to give people a chance to log in, and then we will get started. So please stand by. Brethren, I will remind you that once we get started, if at any point you have a question for myself or any of the presenters, if you would be so kind as to enter those into chat. We have folks that are monitoring the questions, and we'll make sure that we get to your answers as quickly as we can. I hope you were all outside enjoying today's beautiful day. The weather was a whole lot better than it was on Saturday, which is very encouraging. I do believe that spring has arrived. Again, brethren, I'm going to wait just one more minute to allow people to log in, and then we will get started. Very good. Well, brethren, thank you so much for joining us this evening. I would ask that you all please bow your heads, and Right Worshipful Brother Sprague, if you would be so kind as to lead us in prayer.
Heavenly Father, we thank you for this beautiful spring day. We ask that you watch over all the men and women who are working to help keep us safe during this unprecedented time, that you allow things to return to normal as quickly as you can. And we ask that you watch over all the men and women in our military. Amen.
So motivated. Thank you, Larry. Well, brethren, I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedules to join us this evening. Just a quick walkthrough of the agenda. I'm going to give you a brief update on COVID-19 and the actions that Grand Lodge has taken in response to that pandemic. Then I'm going to turn this event over to Right Worshipful Brother David Collins, who will talk about the opportunities to practice Freemasonry in our current world. David will then turn the presentation over to Right Worshipful Brother Dan Hotchkiss, who will provide you with a summary of the recent Tax Act. Dan will then pass the presentation over to Right Worshipful Brother Scott Borthwick, who will speak to you about caring for our special ladies in these trying times. Scott will then turn the presentation over to Right Worshipful Brother Larry Sprague, who will talk about helping our youth groups in this online world that we're living in today. And then Larry will turn the presentation over to our guest speaker tonight. I'm very pleased to announce that we're being joined by Right Worshipful Brother Paul Smith, who I think will provide you with a very informative Masonic education talk. All right, so brethren, once again, if at any point you have a question, please make use of the chat. And we've got a brother standing by who can make sure that I'm aware of that. So a quick update. Brethren, I just want to remind everyone that the edict that unfortunately I had to issue does remain in effect. Therefore, worshipful masters throughout this grand jurisdiction are empowered to make decisions whether or not to hold their stated meetings. No stated meetings are to be held through that period where our governor has executed a stay-at-home order, therefore through May 4th. And I think we all understand that May 4th is a date that is subject to change. So my advice to you, worshipful masters, is that you err on the side of caution. I know that you're coming up to the point where you need to get trestle boards into the mail for the month of May. I would ask you to take serious consideration of canceling your May stated meetings. I know that's a painful thing and we all want to get back to normal. but we're not out of the woods just yet. So I would ask you to give serious consideration to that. And if there is an update from our governor with respect to the May 4th stay-at-home order, Grand Lodge will make sure that you are updated. Just a quick update on schedules. You all know that unfortunately I had to postpone our annual communication that was going to happen in the third Saturday in May. But there are some events that are moving forward pretty much as scheduled, but they'll be done in a virtual manner. So for Grand Lodge officers on May 2nd, we'll be having an online planning meeting. On May 16th, we'll be offering an online Grand Lodge installation. So anyone that wishes to log in and watch the installation of myself and the other Grand Lodge officers, I would encourage you to do that. And then what we've decided to do is, we all know that the fall of this year is going to be a very busy time because everything that you had scheduled in the first half of the year is all going to be pushed to the second half of the year. So understanding that, rather than to try and pick a date which was subject to change, what I have decided to do is that we will be holding both our annual and semi-annual communications on the weekend of November 20th and 21st. On Friday evening, November 20th, the Grand Lodge officers for 2019-2020, along with the Grand Lodge officers from 2020 to 2021, will be my guests. Stay tuned for details on where that venue is going to be held, but you'll be my guests for an evening of dinner and entertainment. Then what we will do is we will convene as a Grand Lodge in Manchester on Saturday, November 21st, where we will open up the annual communication of Grand Lodge. We will conduct our business. We will introduce dignitaries. We will then close Grand Lodge just before lunch. We will head down. Rainbow and Demolay will once again be helping us with that meal. Then we will go back upstairs, where we will open up the semi-annual communication of Grand Lodge, where again, we will handle any necessary legislation, and that's where we will be handling our election of officers. We will then close, and there will be a dinner offered to guests that evening down in the basement dining room in Manchester. So that's a quick update on the schedule. A few things that you should know. As you can well imagine, myself and the Grand Line have been inundated with questions from all throughout the Grand jurisdiction on how do I do this? How should I handle that? How should I respond to this? So what we have done as a line is we've put together a frequently asked questions document that hopefully answers all of your questions. And our Grand Secretary and the Grand Office, who I must say do an absolutely fantabulous job for us, they distributed that document to you all this week. They also sent out a document that was produced by Right Worshipful Brother Scott Newberry, who's very talented in the area of IT. And so he put together a helpful hints for working with online platforms document that for those of you that perhaps aren't as used to working with Zoom or GoToMeeting or other online events, I would encourage you to read that document. And then because so many of you right now are using social media to try and stay in contact with your brethren, we have also sent out the Grand Lodge social media policy as a reminder to you that you should act accordingly. I want to thank everyone that was able to come out and join the Grand Line for the town hall sessions that we held in districts 1 through 4. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get to the remaining districts. So 3 weeks ago, we held a session very similar to this. Right Worshipful Brother Troy Patuan did a fantastic job capturing all of your questions. We've formulated answers to each of those questions. That document is in its final review stages, and we will be distributed to you all this week. So, brethren, I am simply going to say that in these challenging times, I ask you all to remain vigilant and diligent. Please respect the rule of law, practice social distancing, but by all means, stay connected to your brethren, to your special ladies, to your friends and neighbors. Thank you, brethren. So let's see if we have any questions. It looks like in regard to trestle boards, is it acceptable to put TBD when listing the stated meeting in your trestle board? That's an excellent question. I would advise that you not put TBD in your trestle board, primarily because while a lot of people have access to email, a lot of brethren have access to email, not everyone does. I would say upwards of 30% of our membership does not have email, which means that if you make a decision after you've distributed your trestle board, it makes it that much more challenging to make sure that everyone is fully informed. And you should also be putting out notice 30 days in advance whether or not a meeting is going to be taking place. So it would be my strong recommendation that you decide either you are going to have an event or you are not going to handle an event, and act accordingly. All right, very good. Those are all the questions that I see for now. So it's my honor and privilege to be able to pass this event now over to our Deputy Grand Master, Right Worshipful Brother David Collins.
Thank you, Grand Master. Good evening, brethren. It's a pleasure to be with you here tonight. So what the Grand Master wanted me to talk about is opportunities to practice Freemasonry in our current world. And I'm sure many of you have obviously been looking at those challenges. You had stated meetings that you planned. You might have had planned degree work. You might have had planned a great program that you're going to be discussing about with your brethren, and now all of a sudden things have been suspended. Well, brethren, I want to take you back a few Grand Masters and go back to Most Worshipful Brother Stuart Aronson, past Grand Master, who during his term talked about reaching out to our members. And as the Grand Master spoke about, I actually think now there is no time better. There's no formal scheduled meetings going on, brethren. It's a great opportunity, worshipful masters, brethren in your lodge, to take your membership list, split it up between your officers or members of your lodge, and start calling the brethren of your lodge, just to call and reach out and see how they're doing. You know, the Grand Master spoke about that in these times. There's still a lot of brethren out there, especially our more elderly brethren, that do not have email or use email. Or maybe their spouse is the one that looks at it and they may not see it for a bit. So what a great opportunity to pick up the phone. I know a method of communication we probably don't use as much as we used to. We're so used to texting and emailing. We've kind of gotten away from that at times. But here's a great opportunity. Reach out to the members of your lodge. Find out how they're doing. Find out if they're in need. Find out if they're okay. See how they're doing. Maybe they haven't been able to get out. Maybe they need somebody to run a couple errands for them. What a great opportunity to show what the Brotherhood of Freemasonry is all about by doing that. Great opportunity. As well, my brothers, the Grand Master mentioned your special lady. Another great opportunity. We always promise that we will take care of our Masonic obligations. We'll take care of our special ladies. Here's a great opportunity to actually reach out to your special ladies and just find out how they're doing and see if they need anything. Again, you may find something that maybe is a little bit inconsequential, but if they knew somebody could go out and run an errand for them, they do that. A lot of your elderly males and females right now are really staying very close to home. They're not going out because they are very concerned about it. And there may be some errands you need to run. That's what we're all about, my brothers, in this Masonic fraternity we're in. Here's a great opportunity to take advantage of a time when you don't have to worry about having meetings right now, but you can do something to share that brotherhood with your brethren and with your special ladies. Another thing, my brothers, is if you haven't been out there, certainly, the internet, social media, there are a lot of Masonic discussions, Masonic education forums going on of many levels. Weekly, I know here in the Northern Masonic jurisdiction, Scottish Rite is having a weekly degree. They're showing weekly degrees. If you remember Scottish Rite on Thursday nights. I know the York Rite, we're doing weekly Tuesday night discussions. I know many lodges and districts are holding weekly Masonic discussions. I actually joined one, for example, last week, brethren, that actually had on, this was neat. This was by one of the appendant bodies called the Allied Masonic Degrees. And what the discussion was, it was the grandson of Harry Truman. And he came on and talked about Harry Truman's, how Masonry impacted what he did in his life and as President of the United States. What a wonderful discussion that was. I heard things, I'm a history buff, that I heard things talked about I'd never heard of before, brother. There's wonderful opportunities to take advantage of those. When you get something like that and you find something, an opportunity, you know, if you're a member of your lodge, share with your fellow brethren in your lodge and say, hey, here's a great opportunity to find out more about Freemasonry. The other thing, my brothers, the Grand Master talked about is there was a FAQ sheet sent out from the Grand Secretary talking about ways to put together a meeting, so you can have it work to put together a meeting. We certainly have brethren that if you've never used some of those forums before, it works very well. You can have a great Masonic discussion. Why not take your stated meeting night and instead of worrying about a meeting, how about just having maybe a little topic and just having a discussion? And maybe the discussion just is a group of brothers on the computer talking about how things are going for them right now. How's their life going? Things they'd like to see and do going forward. There's great opportunities, my now brethren. The other thing I want to share with you, brethren, is over the last 2 Saturday mornings, I was joined by over 30 brethren, 30 officers and lodges of this jurisdiction, where we talked about Masonic leadership. These are great discussions with the brethren, some great feedback from things that are going good, things that could go better. So again, my brothers, avail yourselves of those opportunities, because the time is like no better. You know, I'm sure like many of you in Masonry, you actually have, there are times when you have Masonic meetings multiple nights a week. You're not having that right now. You also have, my brothers, probably for many of you that have young children at home, there's a lot of certainly stressors inside the household, and maybe just joining in a Masonic, just a virtual discussion, may just be able to clear your mind for a little bit and just relax and enjoy some of, again, the wonderful things we do as Masonry, some of the wonderful bonds of brotherhood and fraternity we have. Please avail yourselves of that. And there's tons of opportunities out there. I can tell you, my brothers, that I can easily find some great discussion groups really almost on a nightly basis throughout the week that are going on. Please avail yourselves of those. But the one key to remember, my brother, just because we aren't meeting in person doesn't mean we aren't still Freemasons, and it doesn't mean we can't take the opportunity to actually reach out to our brethren. If we do nothing else, my brothers, if you're busy, you have a lot going on, why don't you share the list of your brothers in your lodge, take a couple names, and over the next week, reach out to 2 or 3 of those brothers. Find out how they're doing. Is there anything you can do for them? But most of all, just to see how they're doing, just to chat. This may be a brother that you haven't seen in lodge for many years because they're not able to come. But, you know, they certainly would love to know what's going on in lodge, and you can pull them up to date on what's going in lodge. So please, my brethren, avail yourselves of those great opportunities. There's plenty of them out there. So with that, Grandmaster, I didn't see any questions. I did see one here, Most Worshipful. I see there's a question, and we'll kind of pause here, looking at what are your thoughts on the Feast of St. John? Do you want to answer that now, Grandmaster?
Brethren, so one thing that you should be aware of is that Grand Lodge is a guest. Whether we go to Ringe to Cathedral of the Pines, or whether we go to the church in Portsmouth, in both cases, we are guests. So the decision on whether or not those events are going to be held are currently being undertaken by those respective lodges. I've not received a definitive update as of right now. So as of right now, I would say that no news is good news. The event is still on. But again, stay tuned for any further updates. Thank you.
Thank you, Grandmaster. So with that, I don't see any questions on that. So what I'm going to do is turn the meeting over to Right Worshipful Brother Dan Hotchkiss to talk about the recent Tax Act. Dan?
Thank you, Right Worshipful. Good evening, brethren. It's wonderful to talk with you all this evening. Complete disclaimer before I start. While I have earned my CPA designation and maintained my CPA designation, I am not currently a practicing CPA. So none of what I'm going to provide you constitutes tax advice. However, what I would like to do for many of you, you've heard in the news some of the items that have come out from the federal government about economic impact payments, as well as some things regarding student loans and maybe some other things that might be applicable in your employment workplace. So I'd just like to provide you with a brief overview of those, just so you have some general information, and I'll direct you to where you can get some more information regarding those particular items if you have further questions. So first and foremost, the economic impact payments. Those have actually started to show up in folks' bank accounts. For those who have already filed their returns and their bank account information was already on file with the IRS, if they had filed their returns and had their refunds direct deposited, or if they had a payment process through their account. The amounts to be received. If you are an individual filer or a head of household, that total would be $1,200. If your income for individuals did not exceed $75,000 as reported on your tax return. For household filers, that number increased a little bit to $112,500. For married couples filing a joint return, if your income did not exceed $150,000 as reported on your tax return, you would get a deposit of $2,400. In addition, for every qualifying child that you reclaimed as a dependent on your tax return, you would receive an additional $500. As I noted earlier, those payments have started to appear in many folks' bank accounts. However, if you have not yet received your payment, you can go online to the IRS website, www.irs.gov, and there's a button there that says Get Coronavirus Relief. And then under that, there's a economic impact payment button, and you can click check your payment status. If your payment information is not on file via direct deposit, you should expect to be receiving a check sometime in the very near future as well. Student loans. For those of you who currently are paying on student loans or may have children or grandchildren paying on federal student loans, part of the CARES Act that was passed included reducing the interest rate on those student loans from now until September 30th, 2020 to 0%. In addition, those student loans were automatically placed on administrative forbearance, which means no payments are required between now and September 30th, 2020. Now, that doesn't preclude you from continuing to make payments on your loan if you so desire. However, if you want to do that, you have to go into your account and process those payments manually. But you are not required to do so. You can certainly elect not to be placed on administrative forbearance, but again, you have to go to your account and make that election as part of that process. Now, if some of you, and this particular provision only applies to federal student loans. If for some reason you have private student loans, maybe you refinance them and received a better rate, this provision does not specifically apply to those. However, you can certainly check with your financial institution and ask them about any special provisions that they may have that may relate to this provision to maybe forego some of your payments for a little while. Lastly, I'd just like to do a brief review of some of the employee benefits that were part of the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. As part of that act, employers with less than 500 employees should be providing an additional 80 hours of paid sick leave for those individuals that cannot work because they are being quarantined pursuant to a federal, state, or local government order or advice of a healthcare provider because of and/or that they're experiencing specific COVID-19 symptoms or seeking a medical diagnosis, therefore. And in addition to that, an additional 2 weeks or 80 hours of paid leave at 2/3 regular pay because you're unable to work because of bona fide need to care for an individual who is subject to quarantine because of coronavirus. Or you have to care for a child whose school or childcare provider is closed or unavailable because of reasons related to COVID-19. If you have any of those potential issues, brethren, I would encourage you to check with your HR department at your employer and see whether or not they are a qualified employer under these particular rules, and whether or not you would potentially be able to apply for those additional benefits. Brethren, just a very, very brief summary of some of the tax acts that impact us all individually. I hope you found it beneficial. And I'm looking for any questions.
Yeah, so Dan, there is one question that I think, David, if you could please address the question that we received regarding a relief fund.
Yes, Grandmaster. So my brother, yes, the Grand Lodge of New Hampshire does have a charity fund that certainly brothers in need can certainly appeal out to. Keep in mind, my brothers, again, we do have money. We've already talked about this amongst the Grand Lodge Finance Committee, that we do have certainly some funds that are earmarked for that. But keep in mind, in the same perspective, we don't have large endowments, so it would be very difficult to essentially give large sums of money. But certainly, if there are brethren in need, that's certainly something, as the chair of the charity committee, that brethren can certainly reach out to me and discuss what the particular issue is. So we can certainly look at that. Just understand, brethren, our funds are not unlimited. And again, the charity fund has certain restrictions and limits to that. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, David. There was also a question, because we expect the fall season to be unusually busy with work postponed from Q1 and Q2, will adjustment to our relief of the visitation and inspection expectations be made? My brother, this is a question that I intend to discuss with the district deputy grand masters in conjunction with our upcoming planning meeting. I think realistically, we need to be reasonable. These are unprecedented times. We are experiencing something that, as a Grand Lodge, we've not dealt with certainly for a very long time. So we can't go into this blindly. We need to understand that this is going to have special implications on brethren and their work schedules, their family schedules, and their Masonic schedules. So I will definitely be working with your district deputy grand masters on the approach that we're going to take for rules regarding visitation and inspection. So stay tuned for further detail on that.
So, brethren, I do not see any questions regarding to my portion of the program. As such, I will now turn it over to Right Worshipful Scott Borthwick, who will talk about caring for our special ladies during this time.
You can all hear me. Right Worshipful Brother Collins talked briefly about us reaching out to our special ladies, and I'd like to reiterate that. I was talking to a brother yesterday, and he was telling me that to get all the supplies that he needed for himself and his family, he had to go to 3 different supermarkets because some of them didn't have what he needed. Well, a lot of our special ladies are home and they're alone, and they need stuff, and they're not going to be able to do that. They're not going to be able to go out and go to 3 different supermarkets looking for stuff. This is an ideal time for us as Masons to contact them, see what they need, and take care of their needs. And, you know, it's nice when one brother from a lodge calls all the special ladies and sees how they're doing, but it would mean a lot more if everybody called, or as many as can. They're going through a tough time, especially the ladies that are living at home alone. Their families moved away, and of course they have no husband. This is the time to reach out to them. And it is what they deserve after all the years that their husband gave to Masonry and nights away from them. It is now our turn to stand up and take care of them, especially in these trying times. That's really all I have to say. I just want to reiterate the fact that it is very important that we follow our obligation and take care of our special ladies. Any questions? Hello?
Okay, I appreciate that update, Scott. I don't see any questions at this time, so why don't you hand it off?
Okay, so I'll hand it off to Right Worshipful Brother Sprague.
Thank you, Right Worshipful Brother Borthwick. Brother, and I want to talk tonight a little bit about our youth groups. As tough as this is for all of us, we've all got some life experience and dealings with unforeseen situations, but the young men and women in DeMolay and Rainbow may not have that same opportunity that we've had to deal with life. So, brethren, if you have a DeMolay chapter or a Rainbow Assembly in your lodge, or at least near your lodge, reach out to the advisory board. See what you can do to help. These kids need our help and guidance now more than they ever have before. It's as tough as it is for us, it's even tougher for them. They don't know how to deal with some of these life challenges that we've dealt with in our past. And you all know our Grand Master came from DeMolay, and I believe he's wearing a DeMolay shirt tonight to support DeMolay. So there you go. So if you can, please reach out to them, reach out to the advisory board, see what you can do to help. Many of the DeMolay chapters and Rainbow Assemblies are having meetings like we are tonight via Zoom or GoToMeeting or whatever. Join them, see if you can help. And any questions or thoughts on that? I don't see any. So at this point, I will hand it off to Right Worshipful Brother Paul Smith.
Well, thank you very much, Brother Sprague. Brethren, this evening, first off, I'd like to extend my thanks to the Grand Master for inviting me to have a discussion with you all this evening from an education perspective. This is one of my last acts as Grand Education Officer, so I hope I don't screw it up too badly. That being said, I want to talk tonight about the Baltimore Convention, and it's something that some of you may have heard about, but I wanted to sort of explain what it was, what happened there, what it meant for New Hampshire, and if it has any lasting impacts today. But before we do that, we need to understand what came right before the Baltimore Convention. So I'm going to ask Brother Sprague to briefly mention a little situation we had in the 1820s and 1830s.
Thank you, Right Worshipful Brother Smith. Well, starting in 1826, we all know that there was an event that happened out in the western part of New York, and it's called the Morgan Affair, and it was almost the death of Freemasonry, certainly in the Northeast. So as tough as it is for us, they got through it, we'll get through it too. And it lasted really, really until the Civil War came about, when lodges really started coming back. So it was a good 30 years. So keep that in mind. We can get through this just as they did and keep our lodges strong.
Fantastic. Thank you, Brother Sprague. And apologies for the little prop here, but I thought it might make me look a little more educated this evening. So with that, thank you, Brother Sprague, for sort of setting the scene. In December of 1839, so the Morgan Affair had really been in its thralls for about 15 years at that point. The Grand Master at the time of the Grand Lodge of Alabama was a gentleman named John Hicks. And he sent out to, I think there were somewhere between 20 and 25 Grand Lodges established at the time. And he sent out a proposal that all Grand Lodges should assemble in the District of Columbia in 1842 to have a conference, if you will, to talk about ritual and really sort of the idea of sort of a standardizing of the American way of Masonry, if you will. So 1842 rolls around, and under 10 Grand Lodges show up. New Hampshire is one of them because, you know, we lead the way, and by golly, nothing in Masonry should happen without us. So they get together in the District of Columbia, and one of the first things that they do is they have a chairman elected. Now, the chairman was a gentleman named John Dove, and he was the Grand Secretary of the Grand Lodge of Virginia. Now, what's interesting about him is that he is sort of a direct Masonic progeny, if you will, of Thomas Smith Webb. So Thomas Smith Webb, who is sort of the preeminent Masonic ritualist, you know, the Preston Webb ritual, published his book, the Masonic Monitor, and taught somebody else who's famous for us in New Hampshire, Jeremy Ladd Cross. Jeremy Ladd Cross went up and down the Eastern Seaboard and was Grand Lodge lecturer in many Grand Lodges, and actually taught John Dove. So John Dove is sort of this widely respected ritualist. Everybody says, well, this guy's got his crap together. He's sort of, you know, he's been around. He's a direct lineage of Thomas Smith Webb through William Preston. So, you know, he knows what he's talking about. So basically what the whole notion of that conference was, look, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about every aspect of Masonry. We're going to talk about openings. We're going to talk about closings. We're going to talk about prayers. We're going to talk about the degree work itself. We're going to talk about the lectures of the degrees. We're going to talk about public consecrations. We're going to talk about every aspect of Masonry that has anything to do with ritual, as well as a few other things. But the problem is, so I told you there were between 20 and 25 Grand Lodges at the time, and about 10 or just under showed up for this 1842 meeting, and none of them were lecturers. I mean, they all sort of had a love of ritual and that sort of stuff, but they weren't really the spokesperson for their Grand Lodge on how they do it. So what they did was they adjourned until the next year in 1843, and they were to meet in Baltimore. So 1843, most of the Grand Lodges at the time, minus Pennsylvania, because Pennsylvania said, no, we're not participating in anything you do. And anybody who ever goes to Pennsylvania now and looks at their ritual, it's still not like anything else you're going to see anywhere in the country, with the exception of Louisiana, which is also weird. So that was sort of the what happened. 1843, we get together in Baltimore, and there. So John Dove is still the chairman. He's reconvened the meeting, and they sent their lecturers. They sent the prime person for every Grand Lodge. And we in New Hampshire sent our Grand Lecturer at the time, and he made a report in Grand Lodge when he returned from that meeting. And I'm going to briefly highlight that. And I'm looking in our volume 2 of the original proceedings of the Grand Lodge here. So, Most Worshipful Master, Wardens, and Brethren, by vote of this Grand Lodge at their last annual communication, the Most Worshipful Grand Master, with the advice of the Grand Wardens, was authorized to appoint a lecturer to attend the late National Masonic Convention in Baltimore. Having been honored with the above appointment and feeling at all times happy to serve my brethren of the Masonic family to the best of my limited abilities, I accepted the appointment and, in obedience to my instructions, repaired to the city and took my seat in said convention on the 8th day of May last, as the representative of this Grand Lodge. As the minutes of the proceedings of the convention are published and will shortly be laid before you, a lengthy report from me at this time may not be deemed necessary, but in obedience to call from the chair, I rise and ask leave to say that, as will be seen by the proceedings of the convention, 16 of the 23 Grand Lodges in the United States were represented. And it gives me great pleasure to state that although the delegates were strangers to each other, coming from the East, the West, the North, and the South, and having one great object, the good of the craft in view, they there met as ancient, free, and accepted Masons. And to say this is at once avowing the great principles, the leading characteristics of our profession, harmony and brotherly love, prevailed from the opening to the close of our deliberations. Such was the mutual goodwill, the harmony, the zeal manifested by each other, and everyone present for the interest of the Masonic institution, as left no room to doubt that our coming together would be attended with the most happy and beneficial results of our beloved fraternity. That's just part of the report. So the report was made in New Hampshire. Several things came from that convention. Specifically, there were many ritualistic components that were sort of proposed. And I've asked Brother Busby, who's running our show tonight, to post a link to the actual trestle board of the Baltimore Convention in the description. The reason for that is because it's actually a book, essentially. It outlines what was agreed to at this meeting. And there's quite a lot there. In terms of ritual, in terms of other things as well. And I'll get into that. But there were several things that they tried to do and also didn't do. They also tried to define the landmarks. Now, if anybody who is interested in Masonic landmarks or Masonic history and philosophy knows that there are many Grand Lodges with many different landmarks. So right away, you can see that that was not one of the things that was agreed to at this Baltimore Convention. New Hampshire maintains its landmarks. North Carolina has 25. So I mean, there are some that just span the gamut. But anyway, so what happens at any good Masonic meeting? Well, somebody takes minutes. So they took minutes of the meeting, and the publishers were two brethren who were there, along with John Dove, who was the Grand Secretary of Virginia and also the chairman of the convention. He was sort of tight about the report and what was contained therein. He was not extremely pleased with many of the drafts that were presented to him, such that the final draft was not shown to him and was printed without his approval. So after that, he made it his personal mission and vendetta to campaign against the adoption of the Baltimore Convention in many of the Grand Lodges up and down the seaboard at that time. So as you know, that's if something doesn't go your way, you have a right to speak, and by golly, this brother did. So, but we in New Hampshire were all about it. There was a great deal of harmony at this convention. There was a great deal of discussion. It was very much like a big kumbaya type of thing. And that's frankly Masonic. That is as it should be. Behold how good and pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. I mean, we surely did at that point. Interestingly enough, many of the things that were adopted in ritual then were adopted around the country at that point. And not necessarily the report in full of the convention, but individual pieces. And New Hampshire was one that ratified most of those pieces. There were some things, though, that aside from the ritualistic component, I mentioned that there were some other things that were discussed and brought up at this meeting. One thing that was codified was the dugars and signs of the 3 degrees, and that was accepted amongst the 16 of the 23 that were there. So at least in those 16, you will always find that the dugars and signs are the same. Interestingly enough, the movable and immovable jewels of the lodge, and I'm not going to get into this just in case there are cowens and eavesdroppers about, but they were switched. So the movable jewels that are now movable used to be immovable, and the immovable jewels now used to be movable. So it's kind of interesting that was an agreed to switch at that time. one of the things that was suggested from this was that there should be a United States Grand Lodge. Now, that's a horrible idea for a myriad of reasons, but it sort of panned out that ideally it would basically be sort of almost like an Articles of Confederation, which for anybody who knows American history was sort of a loosely organized thing whereby this national organization would settle disputes between Grand Lodges and that sort of thing. That obviously failed. Back then, as Right Worshipful Sprague mentioned, we were coming into a little period of strife where the 10th Amendment was very much a discussion of debate, also known as states' rights, and so even in the North, the notion of states' rights in terms of Grand Lodge was very much prevalent. But and part of the discussion was that every couple of years there should be meetings of all the Grand Lodges, a national type convention, if you will. And what rose from that is something that we do still practice today, and that is the Conference of Grand Masters, where the Grand Master, the Deputy Grand Master come together across the country and work out many issues that may exist. The issues of recognition of foreign Grand Lodges are settled there. So those are some things that did come from that. One thing that was suggested, another thing, and I'm sort of highlighting many of these things because I'm going to be done here in a couple of minutes. But one of the things that was suggested was in the discussion of the blazing star in our ritual. There was a motion to have that become the blazing star over Bethlehem, which obviously is a very Christian allusion to the birth of Christ, and really went down in flames because even the brethren in the very Christian parts of the country, and keeping in mind, of course, that in the 1840s, I mean, we're still talking about a fairly practicing citizenry in terms of religion, not like today, where Christianity was very prevalent amongst many men. There was a discussion that this was not a Masonic notion. The universality of Freemasonry does not hinge on one religion or another. And so that was not adopted, and I think rightfully so. One thing that I did want to mention as I sort of move to close here is the idea of the Morgan affair. So what happened was it is said that Morgan was made an entered apprentice, and he probably was. And he sort of worked his magic and his evilness into appearing in other lodges and getting more secrets and that sort of thing. So part of John Hicks, the Grand Master of Alabama's notion in 1839 was, we need to figure something out so this kind of crap doesn't happen. In the 1700s, we had scores of exposés in England about the ritual and that sort of thing, people who'd worked their way in or lied or published work and that sort of thing. And frankly, by the 1830s, Masons were getting kind of tired of that. And so the idea was that, and one of the things that was adopted around a great deal of the country, was that business could only be conducted in a Master Mason's lodge. Now, we kept that for 160 years here in New Hampshire. It wasn't until 2000 that the Grand Lodge of New Hampshire dropped that requirement so that we could allow for business to happen during an entered apprentice or a fellowcraft meeting as well. And there are still some lodges or Grand Lodges around the country where this still has to take place. I believe Virginia is still one of those states that only business can take place in a Master Mason's lodge. So in terms of the impacts, if you will, of the Baltimore Convention, it really did have a great deal of impact. A lot of the ritualistic stuff may have been incorporated piecemeal in certain jurisdictions. Some of the things that were brought up were utterly dismal, but there are things that had lasting effects. We have the Conference of Grand Masters because of that. We had some things that survived for quite a long time. The idea of doing Master Mason meetings where business could be conducted only. The movable jewels, the settling of due guards and signs. I mean, those are some significant issues. So obviously the Baltimore Convention did play an important role in Masonry, not just in New Hampshire, but all around the country. And it's just very interesting when you look at our history, the sort of the ebbs and flows that we've gone through over the time. So I think I'll end it there as we get closer to the 8 o'clock hour. But it's as I said, I've asked Right Worshipful Busby to post a PDF of the trestle board of the Baltimore Convention in the comment or the description of this meeting. So hopefully that will be there and you can read through it and see what works for you or what works for New Hampshire, if you will, and what hasn't. So and Chris just said it's there. So thank you, Chris, and I do hope you all enjoy it. And I do want to just take one quick opportunity, Grandmaster, by your leave, if I may, that over the past several years, the Education Committee has worked to put together a Grand Lodge Speakers Bureau. And we have finally done it. It's online on the Grand Lodge website. Under the For Masons drop-down link box, there's several links, and one of them is the Education Committee Speakers Bureau. There are, I think, 18 brothers who are listed there with various topics. And the idea is that the email address of the Grand Education Officer is linked there. So if you are interested in having any one of those brothers come and talk about one of those issues or topics, please feel free. This is important because it's not just that you're trying to do district deputy grand education officers in your own lodge and settle that constitutional requirement, but if you're just looking to have a Masonic discussion, by all means, reach out and see if one of those brothers is available. And I can tell you I've seen most of those guys talk, sometimes several times, and they wouldn't be on the list if they weren't capable of delivering a presentation. And I'm eager for you to exercise that option and hope you make good use of it. Grandmaster, thank you again for having me this evening, and in the Grand Line, thank you for your indulgences. And with that, I will shut up.
Well, Right Worshipful Smith, thank you so much for bringing your light to the brethren on this call. And I think the pipe is very appropriate. It certainly does accentuate the message. So I'm going to speak for just a few minutes here, brethren. Now is the time. Feel free, if you have any questions for Brother Smith or for anyone else here in the Grand Line, please make use of the chat now. I want to just remind you all that as a part of my message of be here because you want to be, not because you have to be, I do have 4 pillars. The first is retention, and we all know that we're going through a very difficult time now, where it's challenging when you can't get together in person to have these sorts of discussions. But that's also where you need to get creative. And I think through bad can come good. I think that we're all learning new techniques, new technologies that are probably going to stand the test of time and will probably be used into the future, even after we've started getting back together face to face. My next is ritualistic excellence. And brethren, I've always firmly believed that our ritual is absolutely core to Freemasonry, and it is what truly sets us apart. Then what you just received is Masonic education. We have, under the leadership of Right Worshipful Smith and Malcolm Wolf, two people who have done a fantastic job leading our education committee into the future. We've got Right Worshipful Brother Dave Ackridge, who will be installed here soon, and we welcome his new leadership. But brethren, the education committee in the Grand Lodge of New Hampshire, you sometimes think, geez, we're just this little state. What kind of an impact could we possibly have? Well, I will tell you that in my travels prior to COVID, through other jurisdictions and those of some of the other Grand Lodge officers, we consistently hear that New Hampshire is really leading the charge. And I think the work that Right Worshipful Brother Smith and Wolf are doing to advance the cause of Masonic education in this grand jurisdiction is unmatched and very much appreciated. And then lastly, my pillar is communication. That's what we're trying to do for you this evening, brethren, is to offer you more information. I'm told that we have about 80 to 83 brethren that have joined us this evening, which is absolutely fantastic. And what it demonstrates to me is, and I should point out that that number has stayed here to this point, meaning you're finding value in the information being shared. So it's my intent to continue to offer these forums in the future to keep you updated. By all means, if you have any suggestions on additional topics that you'd like to hear about, I would encourage you to reach out to your Grand Secretary and the Grand Lodge office and let them know what it is you have in mind, and we'll see what we can do. But expect for an invitation coming out sometime this week, where we'll be holding a session similar to this in the not too distant future. It's been suggested that we might want to move the time back a little bit, perhaps 7:30 or 8 o'clock. For those that need to put youngsters to bed right around 7 o'clock, we'll take a look at that and see if that makes sense. But brethren, I'm just going to stop for a moment and see if any of you have any questions before we close. Okay, seeing none. I just want to mention to all the Grand Line officers and to Right Worshipful Brother Smith that your time is valuable, and yet you're here with us tonight. That is very much appreciated. And I am sure the 80 other folks, the 80 other brethren that are on this call appreciate it as well. I do very much appreciate it. There is a comment that came in. I would like to see this continue with Masonic education and happenings after we are able to get out and do face-to-face stuff. I agree. I think there's an opportunity here not only to do face-to-face, but to continue online technologies. We all know that we live in a state where the roads can sometimes be hazardous, and it may make sense to hold events such as this, information sharing or Masonic education type events, certainly not static communications, but other sorts of information exchange events. We can do those electronically, digitally. We do need to be cognizant of those brethren who don't have access to this technology and need to dial in by phone. We got to make sure that we don't exclude them by any means. But I agree with my brother that I think there's an opportunity here for us to do both face-to-face and digital in the future. All right, so with that, I want to thank our line very much. I want to thank Right Worshipful Brother Smith, our guest speaker this evening, for doing a fantastic job. And so I am now going to ask Right Worshipful Brother Patuan if he would please lead us all in a parting prayer.
All right, brethren, if you'd bow your heads and be reverently attentive. Thou hast heard us proclaim our faith and announce our purposes this night. Now as we prepare to leave this sacred place, and strengthen, sustain us to do thy will, as thou givest us the sense of thy presence. Bless us and all Masons everywhere. Amen.
So motivated.
So motivated. Brethren, have a fantastic evening. We're going to sign off at this time, but thank you so much, and I look forward to speaking with you soon. Please stay safe.